Good morning, Ray. So if you can cast your minds back, last week's lesson on Friday, cast your minds back, we're looking at perspective in relation to First Nations people in North America. And we're looking at Pocahontas, Colors of the Wind. I want us to, in that same light, just to focus on perspective again this lesson, but this time we're looking at some subject that's more closer to home. We're looking at Aboriginal perspectives here in Australia. So can I just get a quick rundown? Can I get a volunteer to read up uh, this thing here from the front, please? Yes, Timmy? Yeah, that's right. So perspective is the lens in which we see the world. So kind of like how your perspective on the world will be very much different to mine. Your perspective coming from that of a student, and mine coming from that of an adult teacher. Okay. So I'm going to have this up on the board, but I will be passing around a sheet for you guys to paste in your books as well. So this is a poetry triangle guide, and so this is a step-by-step guide as to how we can properly formulate uh, an essay with poetry. So if you look there for step one, it's understanding the subject matter or purpose. So why has the poet, or in this case the composer, looked at the subject matter, the feelings, so looking at the tone or the emotion, and then finally the analysis, looking at the poetic technique. So there's a few things there that I want to look at. I want to look at punctuation, things like structure, so enjambment, what effect does this have on meaning, mood and tone, remembering the difference between mood and tone. Mood is the author's general attitude towards the text or the subject matter, and tone being what he wants us, or what he she wants us to feel. Intersecting words and phrases, language features and poetic techniques, again, things like rhyme, rhythm, similes, metaphors, and finally form. Okay. And then finally, we get to synthesize that all together. And that what that means that in year eight is basically just taking, if we were to use an example from an exam, short answers or multiple choice questions, and then putting them all together into one coherent argument in an essay. Okay, so now we're going to be looking at annotating the poem itself. So we're going to read it together as a class. Then I've got some annotations up, but I want you guys to work in pairs to come up with your own annotations. So maybe even uh, one highlighter you want to maybe jot down any poetic techniques. With another colored highlighter, you might want to do something else. Any words that you might not be familiar with, you can also highlight it as well. And we'll come back to it in the end. Okay. So I'll give you guys about 10 minutes and then we'll come back to you. Hey, hey. Okay. Okay. So here we're going to actually read the poem together as a class. And then I'll get you guys to annotate it in groups. I've already made some annotations myself, but you guys might want to go and look over your own and make any some sort of amendments to it. What I'll recommend is maybe with using one highlighter, you might want to highlight any poetic devices, and then using another highlighter, you might want to look at the different perspectives that are explored. So perspectives in this case being the Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal perspectives. Okay, so we're going to do that in groups, and then we're going to come back and I'll give you guys about 10 minutes, and then we'll come back together as a class and look at some of the annotations we've made. Okay. We've got here, no more boomerang, no more spear, now a civilized colour bar and beer. No more corroboree, gay dance and din. Now we got movies and pay to go in. So I want us to identify first the rhyming scheme or the rhyming pattern that appears here. Yep, that's correct. So it's A, B, C, B. Okay, boomerang, spear, civilized and beer. Can we see that beer and spear both rhyme? For those of you guys who don't know, or does anyone here know what a corroboree is? No? Okay, so a corroboree is basically a traditional Aboriginal dance. Okay, so it's saying here, no more corroboree, gay dance and din. Now we got movies and pay to go in. So it's basically lamenting, or it's, I guess, uh, sad at the fact that they've lost their traditional way of entertainment and now they actually have to pay to in order to go in and be entertained by moving pictures when they could have had a much more fulfilling, entertaining experience dancing amongst people of their own kind. Stanza 3, no more sharing what the hunter brings. Now we work for money, then pay back for things. So again, it's using those negative connotations of no more, no more of this, no more of that, conveys isolation and loss of communal culture. So back in when they were hunter gatherers, they used to go out and hunt for food, gather any fruit and berries, and bring it back to the mob, to provide for them. Now they actually have to go and work in order to get money to provide for their families. Now we track bosses to catch a few bob. Now we got walkabout on bus to the job. One time naked, who never knew shame. Now we put on clothes to hide what's her name. So again, it's using those colloquial language there, the fractured sentence structures to get a voice within the text, and that mimics the voice. Okay, that's important. The voice and the perspective of the Aboriginal people. So in that stanza there, it's talking about uh, when the inclusion of white man culture, like the Western culture, that had basically supplanted and replaced the dominant Aboriginal culture. You've got now Aboriginal people feeling ashamed of being free and walking about naked, and now they're having to conform to the more dominant white colonial uh, hierarchy or structure. Noble Gunwa, now bungalow, paid by hire, purchase in 20 years or so. Lay down the stone axe, take up the steel, and work like a for a white man mill. So the use of language there is important because the author, she's not using it in order to, but she's using it in order to be provocative. She's using a very racially charged word a lot very often. It was something that was used back then. It's a slave term. So when it says there and work like an N word, it's having that negative connotation, that stigma that attached to being a slave. Okay, it's not something that's okay, but it's using it as a sort of like a shock value. The author wants us to feel shocked at the language being used here, how the Aboriginal people are meant to feel like slaves working for the white man in order to earn a living to provide for their family. So once we go through the poem, we're going to be then using language of representation, which you guys would have already been familiar with last year. But that what that basically means is you're taking uh, language that you would normally use and bring it into an essay. So I've got some examples there. So words we've been exposed to. So represents, symbolize, suggests, illustrates, explores, exemplifies, portrays, highlights, all those sorts of words that we're going to be using in order to form a complete sentence. So just one example here that we're going to be looking at. So uh, it asks us to use language of representation to explain the effect of the poetic techniques and language features used in the Mumbai. So the first one I've got up there for you, the poet utilizes irony in the line, now all civilized, color by and bear, to emphasize, see that language of representation there, to emphasize the fact that white man's more advanced way of life has caused problems for Aboriginal people. And this goes further because you can also look at um, the perspective on that as well, looking at two different perspectives. You've got the Aboriginal perspective for coming from the author, but also the colonial perspective on their culture. And so in pairs, I want you guys to also uh, look at some other techniques as well. So that I've got the one there already for you. Nunuku includes a rhetorical question, what they're coming at, to suggest that their art is not considered to be as valuable and enriching as the abstract art. Furthermore, it suggested the constant need to defend their culture and traditions. So I want us to go and look at another example up there on the front. And then finally, we'll go through it together as a class, and then you guys can have the opportunity to do it, work individually. So I've already got those two techniques and examples up there for you. You just have to choose an appropriate language of representation, and then to what effect does it create. So the first one I got there is repetition of the phrase "no more" is employed throughout the poem to what? To emphasize, to exemplify, to suggest. Choose an appropriate language of representation that you think would go in there, and then what effect does it create? Same thing on the bottom here. The juxtaposition of life in modern Australia with Aboriginal life in the past does what? Okay. And then finally, you're going to be given a mini essay, which you can, this is what we're talking about with regards to synthesizing. You're taking content that we've already learned from the past and you're putting it into one coherent essay or argument. So, how does Nichols' perspective encourage readers to think critically about social justice, using examples from the poem to support your argument? Now, examples in the form of what? Yes, Jimmy? Quotes. Okay, so using quotes, using techniques in order to strengthen your argument. Okay.